Hello friends, welcome back to Chopcode. Today we will learn about absolute layout in .NET MAUI, a layout that gives you complete control over the positioning of your elements. So let's get started. So what is absolute layout? Absolute layout in .NET MAUI allows you to position and size UI elements based on absolute or proportional values. Unlike other layouts, it offers freedom to place elements exactly where you want on the screen, regardless of other elements. This layout is especially useful for complex designs where exact positioning is needed. Let's go to Visual Studio and look at some examples. For this demo, I have created a new project called Absolute Layout Demo and a new content page inside it called Absolute Layout Demo page. And I have also added this page as the initial page in the app.xaml.cs file. Now let's go back to Absolute Layout Demo page. As we will be working with absolute layouts, so let's remove this stack layout and replace it with absolute layout. Let's remove this label control as well and instead add two button controls. Now let's launch the application and see how it looks like. Now, as the application has been launched, we can see that the button controls are located at top left of the absolute layout container. And we can also see that elements are positioned on top of each other. And this is default behavior of this layout. If you do not specify where you want to place the controls, they will be positioned at the top left. So let's go back to Visual Studio and let's make some modifications to see how this layout works in a better way. As we know, absolute layout is used to position and size children using explicit values. The position is specified by upper left corner of the child relative to upper left corner of the absolute layout in device independent units. Now, if we see, the absolute layout class defines two properties called LayoutBounds and LayoutFlags. Now, what these properties are? If we go to the definition of layout bounds, we can see that it is a property of type rect, which is an attached property that represents the position and size of a child. And talking about layout flags, if we go to its definition, we can see that it is a property of type absolute layout flags, which is an attached property that indicates whether properties of layout bounds used to position and size the child are interpreted proportionally. The default value of this property is absolute flags.none. If this is not making sense at this moment, don't worry, we will be diving deep into it with lot of examples. Now, if we use two buttons inside absolute layout without any property defined, those buttons will appear at top left of the screen and will overlap each other. Now to fix this, what we can do is we can make use of those two properties defined by absolute layout. Now let's go back to Visual Studio and set the value of absolute layout.layoutBounds property. This property takes either two or four parameters. What are those four parameters? Those are x coordinates of the control, y coordinates of the control, the width of the control, and height of the control. Either you can specify these four parameters, or if you want, you can only specify the x and y coordinates of the control. In this demo, I will be setting all the four values to give you a clearer picture of the absolute layout. Now, let's set the layout bounds value of this button control to 0, 0, 100, and 50. Now, this implies that we want this button control to be placed at x coordinate 0, y coordinate 0, with a width of 100 and height of 50. Similarly, let's do the same for our button 2. Let's change the y coordinate of button 2 so that these two buttons don't overlap each other. Let's change it to 700 and rerun the application. Now we can see the button 1 and button 2 are placed at the values specified by us in the absolute layout. We can see that button 1 is placed at the coordinates 0, 0 and button 2 is placed at the coordinates 0, 700. And the width of the buttons is 100 and height of the button is 50. So this is how we can specify the values in the layout bounds and place the button according to our wish. Now let us see what is the use of other property of absolute layout, that is layout flags. Let me move this to another line and add another property here called layout flags. This property takes different values like all, height proportional, none, position proportional, size proportional, width proportional, x proportional, and y proportional. So we will be going through different examples to understand all these different properties. So this property layout flags help us in defining the layout bounds in a proportional way. So currently we are setting the absolute values here, like 100 as the width and 50 as the height. We can also define this in a percentage. So whenever we want to define the layout bounds in a proportional way or in a percentage way, we can make use of the layout flags property. Now, let us suppose we want to set the layout flags to height proportional. Now, as we are setting the value only to height proportional, so we can set any value of height between 0 and 1. So now, instead of 50, let me change this value to 0.5. So what this tells us is that this button control will be taking the 50% height of the absolute layout. Let us save it and see how it looks. Now you can see my button control is taking a proportional value of 50% of this absolute layout. Similarly, we can set layout flags to width proportional as well. Now if we change it to width proportional, now let me change the height back to 50 and change the width to 0.5 instead of 100. Now this implies that my button control will be taking 50% of the width of this absolute layout. Let's save it and see. Now, as you can see, my button control is taking 50% of the width of this absolute layout. Now, if we want, we can also set the value of both height and width in a proportional way. For that, we just have to separate them using a comma. So we can write as many properties as we want in a comma separated way. So now I want both my height and width to be in a proportional manner. So let me set my height as well to 0.5. Now you can see my button control is taking 50% of the height of this absolute layout and 50% of the width as well of this absolute layout. So this is one way of specifying multiple values for a layout flags. However, if we want to set multiple values of height and width in a proportional way, we can also make use of another value called size proportional. So this implies that we want to set both height and width in a proportional way. So if I save it and go back to my emulator, you can see there is no change. My height and width are taking 50% of the space. Now, other than changing the size, we can also play around with the coordinates of the control. For that, we can make use of other values of the layout flag property. Now let's go back to Visual Studio and change the layout flag value to XProportional. Let me change my height and width back to 150, as now we will be playing around with the coordinates instead of the sizes. Now I want my button control to be placed at center of screen 50% from the X coordinate. So let me change the value of X coordinate to 0.5. Now if I save it, you can see that my button has taken a proportional value of 50% from the X-axis. So from X-axis, it is placed exactly at center of screen. Similarly, you can set proportional values of Y coordinate as well. If I set it to Y proportional, let me change the value of X coordinate back to 0 and set Y value to 0.5. Now, a button control is placed at proportional value of 50% with respect to the Y coordinate. If you want to place the button at exact center of the screen, you can make use of both X and Y proportional properties. So I can set both X and Y proportional in a comma separated way. Let me set X as well to 0.5. Now my button control is placed at exact center of the screen because it is taking a 50% proportional value with respect to X-axis and 50% proportional value with respect to Y-axis. Now, if we want to set both the values of x and y proportional, instead of writing them in a comma separated way, we can also make use of another value called position proportional. So this implies that we want to make use of both x proportional and y proportional properties. You can see the result is still same. Now, if you want to make the use of proportional values for all the properties of layout bounds, like x, y, width, and height, in that case, you can set the layout flags value to all. I can set the height and width as well in a proportional manner. If I set it to 0.5 and 0.5, now you can see my button is placed at exact center of the screen, and it is taking 50% of the height of absolute layout and 50% of the width of absolute layout. And if I do not want to use the proportional values at all and want fixed values for my control, in that case, I can set the layout flags to none and can give fixed value to the layout bounds of this control. So now we have specified the fixed values of this button control. And there is one more thing to note. The default values of layout flags is set to none. So even if you remove this property now, it will still be none as the default value is set to none. So you can play around with different values of layout bounds and layout flags and place the controls according to your wish. So let us see one more example and watch how we can make use of these properties to place controls in a customized way. Let me copy and paste some code here to save some time. Here, I have set the layout flag property of both the buttons to position proportional. The height and width of my both buttons is 50 and 100. My button 1 control I want to be placed at the x and y coordinate 0, 0. And I want my button 2 control to be placed at position 1, 1. What this will do is, it will place my button 1 at top left of the screen and button 2 at bottom right of the screen, because this position is 0, 0 for x and y, and this position is 1, 1 for xy. So let us see one more example. Here I have set the layout flags for button 1 to none and for button 2 to all, which means I am using fixed values of layout bounds for my button 1 and proportional values of layout bounds for my button 2. So you can see I can use a combination of these values to place elements on the screen according to my wish. This is helpful for adapting your UI to different screen sizes. Now, this absolute layout also helps us in layering of elements. So let us see one more example for that. With the help of absolute layout, elements can overlap, creating layers. For example, here we place a label control on top of a box view. So this scenario is ideal for overlaying a text on image or setting up layered backgrounds. So here I have a box view control with its color set to gray, which is placed at exact center of the screen, and the height and width of the box layout is set to 200. Similarly, I have a label control with the text set to layered text. This is also placed at the center of the screen with height and width set to auto size. Now, this label control will be overlapping my box view control. Now you can see that absolute layout is really helpful in positioning our elements in an overlapping way. When can we use absolute layout? Absolute layout is best used for designs needing precise positioning, like custom backgrounds, overlays, or game interfaces. It is flexible but less adaptive to screen size, so use it only when specific element placement is crucial. That's it for today's video on absolute layout in .NET MAUI. If this video helped you, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe for more .NET MAUI content. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next one.